Some people are born more flexible than others. But even those of us who think we're not that flexible, we could all become more flexible with a little practice. And if you want to be a more flexible person, you need to start stretching. Stretching can be difficult or even painful when you're first getting started. But if you commit to stretching regularly, it gets easier and you will be more flexible. And it might even improve your health. I did a little research about stretching and I found some interesting things. The benefits of stretching go far beyond increasing flexibility. Have you ever had a headache? Well, guess what? Stretching can increase blood flow to your brain and relieve many types of headaches. Have you ever felt stressed? I know I have. Stretching is a great stress reliever, no matter what is causing the stress. Imagine for a second that your faith is a muscle. If your faith were a muscle, how flexible would you be? Could you touch your knees, your shins, your toes, put your palms on the floor? Or are you not even sure that you have enough faith to stretch in the first place? Just like your body, if your faith is going to be strong and growing and capable of carrying you through difficult challenges, you need to stretch. No matter how far or not so far you think your faith can stretch right now, if you want your faith to grow, you're going to need to stretch it. And this month, we're going to challenge ourselves to stretch our faith together. And it might be fun and it might be challenging, but I promise you it will be worthwhile. But here's the key. Whether it's your body or your faith, stretching only works if you commit to actually doing it. I don't know about you, but there's been a lot of times in my life where I've made commitments, things I was excited to do, changes I wanted to have in my life, getting healthier, eating better, being a better reader, having more control over my schedule, being more disciplined with my time. And sometimes I did a great job following through on those commitments, but other times when it got hard or difficult, I walked away from the commitment. And what I've learned is that no matter what the goal is that I'm trying to achieve, commitment is an essential part of the process. Many of us treat our faith just like I have some of my commitments. We want the results, but we don't want to commit to regularly doing the work to stretch our faith. We get excited about following Jesus, but after a few days or weeks or months, our commitment decreases with our excitement. In the Bible, we can learn a lot about how to stretch our faith from the stories and the words of Jesus' followers who have gone before us. And one of the people that we've talked about before is someone we're going to talk about again. His name was Paul. And Paul was a guy who experienced a major life change. Paul used to oppose Christianity, so much so that he was even responsible for arresting, imprisoning, and even killing people who followed Jesus. But then Paul met Jesus for himself and everything changed. He turned away from who he used to be and quickly became one of the most well-known leaders of the early church. Paul's life change almost immediately wrecked who he was and changed him into a completely different person. But Paul's commitment lasted his entire lifetime. And along the way, he wrote letters to other followers of Jesus to encourage them to have the same kind of commitment to Jesus. One of the letters that Paul wrote was to a group of Christians in the city of Rome. We now call this the Book of Romans. And the goal of this letter was to explain what it looked like to live out your salvation through Jesus Christ. In Romans chapter 5, verses 6 through 8, this is what Paul wrote to the Roman Christians. For while we were still weak, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person, one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. See, Paul wanted the Romans to understand that Jesus could completely change their lives the way he had changed Paul's life. Jesus could break the power of all their mistakes, their failures, and their rebellion against God. Sometimes we make the mistake of thinking that God is only concerned about the afterlife, what happens after we die. But following Jesus should change our lives right here and right now. In the very next chapter of this book, Romans chapter 6, this is what Paul writes in verses 1 through 4. Well then, shall we go on sinning so that God can show us more and more of his wonderful grace? Of course not. Since we have died to sin, how can we continue to live in it? Or have you forgotten that when we were joined with Christ Jesus in baptism, we joined him in his death? For we died and were buried with Christ by baptism. And just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glorious power of the Father, now we also may live new lives. Paul starts by asking them, hey, you know Jesus. Do you want to keep doing the same things you did before you knew Jesus? Do you want to keep struggling with the same things? Or do you want to stretch and experience a faith that is growing and getting stronger? Paul didn't pretend it was always going to be easy. Being baptized into Jesus' death doesn't exactly sound fun. But just like Jesus showed his commitment to you and I by dying for us, Paul challenged us to make the same commitment to God by putting our old way of living to death and finding new life in Jesus. Let's take a look at some of the very first followers of Jesus. The first 4 books of the New Testament are biographies of Jesus. We call these Gospels. And they tell us about Jesus' life and the people who interacted with him. In the first one of these biographies, the book of Matthew, chapter 4, verses 18 through 20, we read about 2 brothers, Peter and Andrew. Peter and Andrew had normal lives, and they had a pretty secure career as fishermen. But everything changed when they committed to following Jesus. Jesus asked them to walk away from their career as fishermen and follow him on a new adventure. And you might think it takes a lot of faith to drop everything and follow Jesus. But this was just the very first of many moments for Peter and Andrew that would stretch their faith. They made a commitment, and then they spent the rest of their lives living it out. Peter and Andrew became apostles in the early church, sharing the good news of Jesus despite dangerous situations. And eventually, they gave up their life because of their belief in Jesus. And it all starts with this one commitment to follow him. In a different biography of Jesus, the book of Luke, chapter 24, verses 1 through 10, we read about another one of Jesus' early followers, Mary Magdalene. Mary was a woman who committed to following Jesus after he changed her life. And while it was probably fun and exciting to follow Jesus when he was healing people and telling stories, it got a lot harder when Jesus was arrested and eventually killed. But Mary was committed to following Jesus, so committed that she stayed close to him even after he died. While many of the men who had followed Jesus fled and went into hiding after his death, Mary went to Jesus' tomb to prepare and honor his body. Because of her commitment to Jesus, even in his death, she was the first person to see Jesus alive again and the first person to share the resurrection story with others. For thousands of years, God has been helping people like you and me stretch our faith. For the next few weeks, we're going to talk about a few ways that we can do that. But it all starts here. Just like Peter, Andrew, Paul, Mary, you and I can share and stretch our faith through a commitment. So, do you want your faith to grow? Do you want it to get stronger? 10 years from now, do you want to be a person who follows Jesus, who loves God more than you do today, who loves people more than you do today, who is making a lasting impact on the world? To reach our goals in the future, years down the road, we have to start with a commitment today, a commitment to stretch and to keep stretching.